Francisco the following year. Irish immigrant Frank Rooney found factories closed, life a constant struggle for survival, and hope absent from working class life. So many men took to the roads in search of work that by the mid-decade, tramp had become a fixed institution on the social landscape. Never in the country's history, commented Pennsylvania's Bureau of Labor Statistics, had so many of the working classes, skilled and unskilled, been moving from place to place seeking employment that was not to be had. So, definitely we can call it a major disruption. Can we call it a failure of free economy? And if these disruptions have been at source a government problem, from 1819, 37 and 39, 73, what about the Great Depression? Because the standard line of thinking was it was the last great lurch of capitalism, capitalism's last greedy, self-destructive orgy. Or was it the harbinger of the future of government control? I think it was the harbinger of what's to come. The government's in control of our prosperity now. Has Greenspan broken a bit of that spell? I think so and hope so. Coming from Age of the Moguls by Stuart H. Holbrook. Now, going to come from page 54, and this quote is concerning the crash of 1873. John Pierpont Morgan, almost 34 years old, had been invited to join Philadelphia's Drexel and Company, a banking house second only to that of Jay Cooke's. The Drexels had long been envious of Jay Cooke's virtual monopoly of government financing. So here's where we are. You've heard of James Pierpont Morgan, J.P. Morgan. He joins what becomes Drexel, Morgan and Company. And the Drexels wanted some of the government financing that Jay Cooke had a virtual monopoly on. Among Drexel and Company's many assets was an influential newspaper, the Philadelphia Ledger. The Ledger had just announced the forming of Drexel, Morgan and Company. The Ledger now brought heavy guns to bear on Jay Cooke. It said that the Northern Pacific, Jay Cooke's railroad that he was trying to sell bonds for, we heard about that earlier, was certain to bring Cooke to insolvency. That his efforts to get a new charter for the railroad were being put forth because of the fact that his own money and that of his bondholders had been exhausted. By these and even less subtle items, the credit of Jay Cooke and Company was quickly and thoroughly undermined. All was now ready for the great crash. What history calls the Panic of 1873 had been in the making since the Civil War started. A lot of people bear great responsibility for it, but at the end of the day, it's government intervention. It came to a climax when the House of Jay Cooke and Company, the very Gibraltar of finance, closed its doors at 1:15 noon on the 18th of September. 37 banks and brokerage houses in New York City closed during the afternoon. Trading on the New York Stock Exchange was halted by the Board of Governors. Within 48 hours, railroad construction ceased, not only on the Northern Pacific, but on roads in California, Texas, Iowa, Maine, and elsewhere. In the nation's capital, angry crowds surged around the First National Bank demanding their cash or the hides of the bank's officials. The whole great bubble of expansion and inflation was coming down in water. Up in the backwoods of Michigan, sawmills ground to a halt on the Saginaw and Muskegon. Blast furnaces on the Monongahela were banked. 5 banks in Chicago closed their doors. So did other banks all the way from St. Paul to the West Coast. When they could, men and women, the country over, withdrew their funds from banks, city and rural, solid or shaky, and were to keep their cash at home for years to come. Thousands of the less fortunate stood in line to stare at the grimly closed doors of empty banks and trust companies. No matter the weather, a pall of gloom seemed to settle over everything. For the first time in their stark lives, millennial prophets were happy. Chaos and old night were here. The end was nigh. President Grant and his Secretary of Treasury hastened to New York City, where they took a suite of rooms at the Fifth Avenue Hotel and summoned Commodore Vanderbilt and other financial leaders to offer advice. Little came of it, save for a remembered remark of the aged Commodore. Quote, "Building railroads from nowhere to nowhere," he observed, "is not a legitimate business." So there we have some information on that. Government involvement in the economy. Because they weren't just protecting rights, they were undertaking some sort of project for productions or the betterment of something, this, that, or the other. Quite a stack of quotes we got there, and even the ones who don't know what they're talking about give us information on the fact that government intervention in the economy causes quite a bit of stir, doesn't it? Get this picture of a nation transfixed by a new technology. Now, we in modern America were amazed at our cars and computers, but back then in the 1850s and 60s and 70s, they were looking behind them at the horse and buggy age for all of eternity, and all of a sudden we're taking trains places as fast as you please. And I'll make a note to you, they traveled faster on their intercity travels on trains in the 1800s than we travel inside of our cities today in our automobiles. They moved faster on their trains. Fewer people, fewer trains. The problem with trains is single line has to serve a lot of people. It's the thing with cars. One car, one person. But they looked at that as fantastic. Their imaginations were seized by that. The 1800s acted as if building a railroad line itself was a virtue. As if the mere act of constructing it created wealth. That's a delusion that people wouldn't have been under if they were spending the Commodore's money. But they weren't spending the Commodore's money. They were spending bonds issued by governments, trusted by people, supposedly. Well, that's all for now. I don't think, let's see, so we've gotten up into the 1800s, we've done the Civil War, we've done recessions through the 1800s, we know about the growing economic controls and regulations of the 1800s. The next installment of Capitalism, it would be inappropriate to do some video now before doing a video about the Great Depression, because the Great Depression has to be covered in a series on capitalism. So the next subject I think will be the Great Depression, which shan't be hard to find information on. And I kept hitting information on the Great Depression again and again and again. A chapter on the Great Depression with a paragraph on the 1837 debacle. A book on the Great Depression with a chapter on the 1873 debacle. Numerologists must get something out of that. 1837 and 73. Two catastrophic recessions. So next installment, the Great Depression. And then after that, geez, I don't know. We'll have to see.